Hello and welcome to NCBA's Cattlemen to Cattlemen. I'm Kevin Ochsner. Thanks for joining us. Well, it's election day, and no matter the result of this presidential race, there will still be many issues in Washington, D.C. that can impact our way of life. One of those issues is sage grouse. For many years now, both the NCBA and the Public Lands Council have been heavily engaged in the potential policies and regulations resulting from sage grouse conservation efforts. Those efforts led to last year's not warranted decision from the Fish and Wildlife Services, as well as some restrictive resource management plans from the Bureau of Land Management and Forest Service. Joining us from our Washington, D.C. office is Ethan Lane. He's the Executive Director of the Public Lands Council and Executive Director of Federal Lands for NCBA. Welcome, Ethan.
Pleasure to be with you.
First, as the federal government begins implementation of these resource management plans, the industry has been pushing back to ensure that producers aren't unfairly impacted. Tell us about that effort.
Well, unfortunately, that not warranted decision from the Fish and Wildlife Service last year came along with some restrictive resource management plans that are proving to be as restrictive as a listing for producers in western states that have sage-grouse populations on the landscape. What we're seeing is an inappropriate focus on grazing as opposed to the real threats to the species as identified by the Fish and Wildlife Service. Those include wildfire and invasive species like cheatgrass and development. The best cure for these issues, particularly that wildfire threat, is responsible grazing. We are the absolute best remedy for those fine fuels that lead to catastrophic wildfire, and if we're applied properly, we can significantly contribute to the conservation of the greater sage grouse. Unfortunately, that's not what we're seeing with the implementation of these plans, and that's why we're focused so heavily on this issue right now. We've engaged all three branches of government, both the Congress as far as legislation to put a stop to this, as well as the court system, and direct discussions with the administration as far as how this is being implemented.
What are the prospects for some relief for producers before the end of the year?
Well, there is language in the works right now that could be part of a year-end deal. As we know, once the election takes place in November, we'll have a few-week session of Congress where lots of different priorities will be debated, and several year-end pieces of legislation, the so-called must-pass legislation like the National Defense Authorization Act, will come up for a vote. The House-passed version of NDAA has language in it that would provide producers the relief they need to continue operating for the next several years. We're actively engaged in trying to get that language into the final NDAA bill that is sent to the President's desk. Our opposition in that arena is a variety of environmental groups that are opposed to any grazing on the landscape, and a new crop of sort of phony sportsmen's groups we've seen over the last few years that pose as sportsmen's groups but really are aligned with those radical environmental groups that we so often see. We are spending all of our resources and time trying to combat that on Capitol Hill and making sure that lawmakers have the right information so that they can make a good decision and keep producers in a productive place both economically and as far as conservation of the sage grouse.
And what can cattle producers do to get engaged in this sage grouse issue?
They can talk to their members of Congress, they can talk to their senators, and they can let them know how important this issue is. The members of Congress on the House side have done solid work on this issue. They've ensured that that language is in the House-passed version of NDAA. If you talk to members of Congress, thank them for their efforts on this issue. If you talk to your senators, give them a call and let them know that this is important language that's critical for the livestock industry and must be included in a year-end deal.
Well, thank you, Ethan, for your insights on this important topic.